Hello, my name is Catherine. My own mother looked me in the eye at dinner and whispered, "He'll never love you." She forged letters, spread lies, even clung to my boyfriend like he was the ghost of her past. Every holiday turned into her stage, every smile a knife hidden behind pearls. I thought silence would protect me, but her obsession grew louder, darker. And now I can't stop asking myself, how far would a mother go to destroy her own daughter's life? My name is Catherine. I'm 32 years old, and I am the youngest daughter in my family. I live in the suburbs of Houston, Texas, and although I've built a life of my own, every time I step back into my mother's house, I feel like I'm stepping into a battlefield. My mother, Rowena, has always carried herself with a sharp tongue and a sharper memory. Nothing is ever forgotten with her, and nothing is forgiven unless she decides it should be. That's the way it has always been. That Sunday evening, the air outside was warm, sticky in the way late spring nights cling to your skin. But inside her house, the air conditioning hummed and the familiar smells of roasted chicken, garlic bread, and cinnamon candles floated through the rooms. The oak dining table stretched long across the dining room, polished until the wood gleamed in the light from the chandelier. Old photographs of us, me and my siblings as children, my father before his health began to decline, family gatherings from long ago, lined the walls in neat frames. I wondered if any of them held honest memories anymore, or if they were carefully selected to tell Rowena's preferred version of our family history. I had brought Jasper with me. It wasn't his first time meeting my family, but it was close enough. I had been careful for months, introducing him only in small ways, but now I was ready for him to join a bigger dinner. He looked good that night, steady in his quiet confidence, smiling politely as he shook hands with uncles and cousins. It mattered so much to me that this went well. I wanted him to see that my family could welcome him, that my mother might finally show me something resembling approval. I held that fragile hope close, repeating in my head, maybe this time she'll accept my happiness. The dinner began as these dinners always did, banter across the table, people passing bowls of mashed potatoes, the scrape of cutlery against plates. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax. I even reached for Jasper's hand under the table, just to feel the quiet reassurance of him sitting beside me. But then Rowena's voice cut through the noise, sharp and deliberate. "So, David," she said, looking right at Jasper. The room went quiet for a beat, as though everyone else had caught it too. My heart thudded in my chest. Jasper let out a small laugh, the kind of polite sound a man makes when he thinks he's heard something wrong. "I think you mean Jasper," he said lightly, tilting his head in her direction. Rowena smiled thinly, too thinly. "Yes, Jasper. I must have mixed it up. But I knew better. That name wasn't random. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. I had heard it before, murmured years ago in hushed conversations I wasn't supposed to overhear. I recognized it instantly, and the sound of it falling from her lips felt like a cold stab right through me. I forced a smile, holding my breath so the rest of the table wouldn't sense how rattled I was. Jasper turned back to his food, not thinking much of it, but I saw the way my mother's eyes lingered on him for a second too long before she finally reached for her wine glass. The rest of dinner passed with the usual chatter, but my ears rang with that one name, David. My stomach churned even as I kept eating, nodding at conversations, pretending everything was normal. Inside, I was analyzing every possible reason she would have said it. Was it deliberate? A message? A warning? And if it was, what exactly was she trying to say? I thought about it all night after Jasper drove me home, his hand resting warmly on the steering wheel as he hummed to the radio, unaware of the storm in my chest. 2 days later, I ran into Mrs. Jennings, an old neighbor who had lived across from us for decades, at the local grocery store. She was cheerful, the kind of woman who always had time for small talk in the produce aisle. We chatted about the heat, about her grandchildren, and then, without any hesitation, she dropped a story that froze me in place. "Your mom," she said casually, holding a cantaloupe in her hand. "She used to lose her mind over this younger guy. I can't remember his name now. Maybe David? Oh, she was never the same after he turned her down." I nearly dropped the basket of groceries in my hand. My pulse pounded in my ears. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my tone light, casual, as though she hadn't just yanked the rug out from under me. Oh, it was years ago. She'd talk about him like he was the one that got away. Mrs. Jennings chuckled. Said he reminded her of everything she wanted but could never have. I forced a smile, my lips dry. Funny, I never heard that story before. She shrugged, placing the melon back on the shelf. Maybe she didn't want her children to know, but trust me, we all heard about it back then. Everyone in the neighborhood did. I nodded politely, finished the small talk, and pushed my cart away, my hands trembling so badly that the plastic milk jug rattled in its holder. My groceries blurred before my eyes. David. The name my mother had used for Jasper wasn't random. It was history clawing its way back into the present. Driving home through the Houston suburbs, the streets lined with oak trees casting shadows across the road, I couldn't shake the heaviness pressing down on me. The smell of grocery bags filled the car, but my mind was miles away, replaying dinner, replaying that whisper from Mrs. Jennings. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time, Maya Angelou once said. That line echoed in my head like a warning bell. My mother had shown me something that night at dinner. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I wasn't going to let her blindside me. Not this time. I needed to watch, to listen, to stay sharp. I felt the walls closing in as if my own mother was circling the edges of my happiness, waiting for the right moment to pierce it. The thought chilled me more than I could admit. Because what I feared most wasn't just that she recognized Jasper, but that she might still want him. The name she used wasn't a mistake. It was a memory, and it was about to become my nightmare. 2 weeks passed after that uneasy dinner, yet the memory of my mother calling Jasper by another man's name stayed lodged in my chest like a splinter. I carried it with me into work, into quiet evenings at home, into moments I should have been at ease but couldn't. By the time Rowena invited us back for another dinner, the sting hadn't dulled. It had sharpened. That evening, Houston's air was warm and humid, the kind that clings to your skin even after the sun has gone down. Rowena's house glowed with light, the yard neatly trimmed, her rose bushes lined up as if they too were enlisted to perform for the neighbors. Inside, the sounds were familiar, the clinking of silverware, the rise and fall of family chatter, the hum of conversation layered with laughter that never quite reached the eyes. To anyone else, it might have seemed like any other family gathering. To me, it felt like stepping back into a minefield. Jasper was with me again, steady and kind. He squeezed my hand as we stepped inside, unaware of the storm I braced for. He greeted my relatives warmly, drawing smiles, even earning a chuckle from my uncle with a joke about Houston traffic. On the surface, everything was easy, but beneath the clatter of dishes and the pleasant exchanges, I felt a current of hostility humming, just waiting to rise. I remembered Mrs. Jennings' words at the grocery store about how my mother had once lost her mind over a younger man. That whisper was now a drumbeat in my ears. As dinner progressed, plates filled and emptied, the tension inside me climbed. And then, without warning, my mother leaned back in her chair, set her wineglass down, and looked straight at Jasper and me. "He'll never love you," she said, cold and clear. The words sliced through the chatter like glass shattering on tile. Forks paused mid-air. My cousin stopped talking. Even the clink of glasses went silent. I stared at her, my stomach tightening. "Excuse me, Mom?" She held my gaze, her expression calm, almost smug. "I'm just being honest. Some men, they never truly stay." It was not advice. It was a dagger, and she wanted me to bleed in front of everyone. I felt heat climb my face, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me crumble. I pressed my napkin into my lap, grounding myself, telling myself I would not break. Jasper, caught off guard, chuckled softly, as if trying to lighten the moment. "I think Catherine knows how I feel about her," he said, glancing my way with a reassuring smile. But even as he spoke, I noticed his brow furrow, confusion flickering across his face. I forced my voice to stay calm. "That's not helpful, Mom." Rowena tilted her head. "Maybe not helpful, but true. You'll see." Inside, I was seething. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about sabotaging me. She wasn't warning me, she was undermining me, planting seeds of doubt in Jasper's mind and in the minds of every relative seated at that table. The silence stretched for another beat before someone changed the subject, nervously laughing about a sports game. The room picked up its rhythm again, but for me, the words hung heavy. I felt as if the oxygen had been sucked out. I knew this wasn't care or concern. This was deliberate, calculated. I made a choice then. I told myself I would not let her words define me, but the seed had been planted. Doubt was there now, small but growing, and no amount of Jasper's polite smiles could erase it. After the tension of her remarks settled into the air like smoke, Rowena disappeared into the kitchen for a moment. She returned carrying a steaming dish. With a flourish, she set it down in the center of the table. "This," she announced, "is something special." The aroma of seasoned beef and herbs wafted through the room. It wasn't a dish I recognized, though I'd eaten at her table my whole life. Jasper leaned forward, curious, and spooned some onto his plate. He took a bite, smiled broadly, and said with genuine warmth, "This is amazing, Mrs. Rowena." Rowena's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Funny," she said, her voice sweet but edged. "It used to be his favorite." Her words landed with a force that nearly knocked the breath from me. I froze. My fork hovered in midair. The wrong name she had used weeks earlier came back with crushing clarity. She wasn't just hinting anymore. She was claiming history. She was weaving Jasper into her past as if he were a part of her story long before me. My chest tightened, and I felt cornered. Did Jasper notice? Did anyone else? He smiled politely, unaware of the undertone, but I caught the flicker in her eyes. She knew exactly what she was doing. I pressed my lips together, suppressing the urge to lash out. Losing my composure in front of the entire family would only feed her narrative, so I swallowed my anger and forced myself to eat, though every bite tasted bitter. My vow was clear. I would confront her, but not here, not with the family watching like an audience at her stage play. Later, as we drove home, the night stretched silent outside the car windows, the city lights flashing past in rhythm. Jasper glanced at me, his hands steady on the wheel. "Your mom is intense," he said cautiously. But maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. I turned to the window, watching reflections blur across the glass. No, she meant every word. An old proverb surfaced in my mind. Once is a mistake, twice is a pattern. This was no accident. She was reviving an obsession, projecting it onto Jasper, trying to rewrite her past and twist my present. I looked at Jasper, his face calm in the glow of the dashboard, and fear welled in me. Not of him leaving, but of my mother destroying everything I had built with him. Inside, though, fear hardened into something else. Quiet determination. If she tried again, I would not stay silent. The food wasn't just dinner, it was a message. And I wasn't sure if Jasper realized he was being served as part of it. It was late one evening when I sat curled up on my couch after finishing lesson plans for my third graders. My phone buzzed with notifications from social media. Nothing unusual, until I saw my mother's name pop up under a recent photo of Jasper and me. It was one of those simple snapshots. Jasper and I smiling in the backyard, the evening sun setting behind us. Friends had left their usual kind comments. But then I saw it. My mother's words written for everyone to read. "Funny, he used to smile like that with me." I froze, staring at the screen. The air in my apartment felt heavy, as though it had turned into water pressing against my chest. It wasn't just an embarrassing comment. It was an intrusion. She had barged into my space, into my life outside her house, and claimed a piece of it for herself. I grabbed the phone and called Jasper right away. He picked up on the second ring, his voice warm, unaware of the storm swirling inside me. "Hey, everything okay?" "No, it's not," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "Did you see what my mother wrote on our picture?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "I did. Look, your mom is joking, right?" I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. "No, Jasper. That wasn't a joke. It was a claim. She's trying to tell everyone that you belong to her somehow." Catherine, people will just think it's an odd comment. They won't take it seriously. Maybe, but I can't shake the feeling that she meant it. And now it's out there for all my friends, colleagues, everyone who follows me. She didn't just embarrass me, she planted something, publicly. The silence stretched between us, and in that silence I realized the shame wasn't mine. Still, I felt it settle on me like a weight. I deleted the comment, but even as it disappeared from the feed, the damage remained. Her words had colonized my happiness, written her shadow across my relationship for all to see. That Sunday, we had lunch with extended family. The sun streamed through Rowena's dining room windows, illuminating crystal glasses and neatly arranged platters. I tried to stay composed, determined not to let her rattle me again. I focused on Jasper sitting beside me, laughing politely at one of my cousin's stories. For a moment, it almost felt like things were normal. But then, as I walked past the hallway toward the kitchen to refill a pitcher of iced tea, I overheard my Aunt Marisol whispering with another relative. The words drifted to me as though they had been meant for my ears. Rowena told me she just doesn't want Catherine to get hurt. After all, he left her once before. I stopped cold, my hand tightening around the glass pitcher. My chest burned as though the words themselves were acid. Stepping into the kitchen, I faced Marisol. Aunt Marisol, what exactly did Mom say? Marisol's eyes widened. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around before lowering her voice. She just said she's worried you'll face the same pain she did. That's all. That's all? My voice cracked with restrained anger. She's telling people Jasper left her? That he hurt her? Marisol raised her hands, palms out, trying to calm me. Catherine, don't make a scene. She feels things deeply. You know how she is. I looked at her, betrayal slicing through me. My own mother wasn't just making careless comments. She was poisoning the family's view of me, rewriting herself as the victim of a love story that never existed. She was reshaping the narrative so that I was the naive daughter about to repeat her mistakes. The betrayal stung more because I knew family gatherings mattered. In our culture, the family's opinion carried weight. To be undermined here, at the table where laughter should bind us together, cut deeper than any public embarrassment. This wasn't impulsive. She wasn't acting out of a moment of bitterness. She was running a campaign. That night, as Jasper drove me home, the images replayed. Her online comment, Marisol's whispered words, the neighbor at the grocery store. I began stitching them together like a cruel quilt that told a story I never wanted to be part of. The pattern was undeniable. My mother had been rejected once, by a man who never returned her affection. Instead of facing that rejection, she was trying to rewrite it into my life. It wasn't about protecting me, I whispered to myself, staring out at the blur of streetlights as they passed. It was about rewriting her own humiliation into my story. The truth seared me, and as Gloria Steinem once said, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." And God, was I furious? I thought about confronting her right away, throwing it in her face, but the timing wasn't right. She was too good at twisting words, too skilled at making herself look like the wounded party. If I charged in without proof, I'd end up painted as the hysterical daughter, the one who couldn't control her emotions. No, I needed to watch, to observe, to collect. I vowed in that car, with Jasper's steady presence beside me, that I would no longer ignore the signs. I would not keep giving her the benefit of the doubt. She had declared her war, and I would prepare myself for the battles to come. The next day, as I drove home through the oak-lined streets of our Houston suburb, the silence in the car was my companion. The family had always been her stage, but now she was trying to control the audience too. By twisting the story, she was isolating me, slowly convincing others that I was destined to fail, destined to lose, just as she had. I thought of Jasper. How long could he stand against the quiet, corrosive manipulations? How long before he questioned if the whispers were true? Fear tightened in me, but it transformed into resolve. I whispered aloud, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. She wants me quiet, but I'll show her what silence can do. I gripped the wheel tighter, the city stretching out before me. My mother wasn't warning me. She was rehearsing a story where I was the fool. and I refused to play that role. By midsummer, the Houston heat pressed against the city like a heavy blanket, and Rowena's house once again became the stage for another family dinner. The moment Jasper and I stepped inside, the familiar sound of cousins chatting, the clatter of serving spoons, and bursts of laughter filled the air. It should have been comforting, but instead, it only made my stomach tighten. I had been through enough of these dinners to know that beneath the noise, something sharper was waiting. The oak table gleamed under the chandelier, polished until it looked almost ceremonial. Plates of brisket, bowls of green beans, and homemade rolls lined the table. The food, as always, was her armor, the way she dressed her power in hospitality. She moved among the relatives with ease, touching shoulders, offering compliments, playing the perfect hostess. It wasn't hard to see why people adored her. But I knew better. I knew the performance behind the smile. Jasper sat beside me, polite as ever, making small talk with my uncle about the Astros' losing streak. He was doing his best to blend in, to carry himself with grace, but I could feel Rowena's eyes cutting across the table toward us. Every time she laughed at a cousin's joke or refilled someone's glass, I sensed her attention shift back to Jasper, like a hawk circling in the air. I braced myself. The memory of her earlier comments, the wrong name, the cruel warning, the invasive whispers, sat heavy in my chest. Tonight, I told myself, something bigger was coming. I could feel it building, the way one senses a storm before the clouds arrive. It began when the plates were nearly cleared, the chatter easing into comfortable pauses. Rowena leaned back in her chair, sipping from her glass, and then she started. "You know," she said, her tone light, her smile coy, "when I was younger, there was a man who broke my heart." The room hushed, forks pausing mid-air. Even the children, sensing a story, quieted down. "He was charming," she continued, her eyes flicking almost imperceptibly toward Jasper. "The kind of man who smiled at you like you were the only woman in the room." My heart pounded. I could feel the burn rising to my cheeks, the humiliation setting in before the story had even ended. A cousin laughed, pointing across the table. "Sounds familiar, Jasper." The laughter spread, a ripple of amusement that made my skin crawl. Jasper shifted uncomfortably, caught in the trap of politeness. He smiled awkwardly, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the silent plea in his eyes asking me what he was supposed to do. I sat frozen, my jaw tight. I understood then. She wasn't just dropping comments anymore. She was crafting an entire story in front of our family, reshaping the past to resemble the present, making Jasper her leading man. And the family was buying it. Inside, my thoughts seared. She's rewriting history at my expense. She's turning my relationship into her stage play, and I am nothing but the punchline. But I didn't explode. I didn't give her the spectacle she wanted. Instead, I forced my hands to stay steady, gripping Jasper's under the table, holding my head high. He leaned close, whispering softly, "Ignore it. They don't believe it." I nodded faintly, but I knew he didn't grasp it fully. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was tactical. She was embedding her lie into the family's memory, and once a story takes root in a family, it can last longer than facts. I remembered Eleanor Roosevelt's words, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." That sentence became my shield in that moment. I would not let her words strip me down. The dinner ended with scattered conversations, the family none the wiser to the war waging silently at the table. Plates were cleared, leftovers packed. Laughter resumed, but it felt hollow, as though everyone was complicit in a charade they couldn't name. Later, Jasper and I sat in the car parked in front of her house. The cicadas hummed outside, filling the silence between us. He sighed heavily, leaning back against the seat. "That was uncomfortable," he said finally. "Your mom really knows how to tell a story." I turned to him, my voice low and firm. "It wasn't a story. It was a weapon." He looked at me, startled. "You think she meant—" "I don't think," I cut in. "I know. She isn't reminiscing. She's orchestrating. She's shaping a narrative where I'm the fool, and she's the woman who was wronged. She's trying to discredit me in front of everyone I love." Jasper rubbed his jaw, frustration flickering across his face. "Then what do? We can't stop her from talking." I stared out the windshield at the glowing windows of her house, the laughter still spilling faintly into the night. Inside those walls, she was probably smiling, sipping another glass of wine, basking in her performance. My chest tightened, but underneath the ache was something stronger, a vow forming in silence. She thought she could erase me with a story, I whispered, more to myself than to him. But I was ready to write my own. It was late at night when my phone buzzed. I had been sitting at my kitchen table, stacks of papers scattered around from grading, when I glanced down and saw the notification. My mother had posted a photo on Facebook, and I was tagged in it. At first, I thought maybe it was something harmless, some old family picture she had dug up. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of Jasper. Not of him with me, but of him helping Rowena out of her car in front of a clinic. The angle was intentional, his hand on her elbow, her face turned toward him, almost smiling. The caption was worse than the picture. Some people never change. Grateful for those who've always been there. I stared at it, my pulse pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. My mother was suggesting publicly that Jasper belonged to her, that he was the steady presence in her life all along. It wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. I called Jasper immediately, my voice shaking as he picked up. "Do you know what she just posted?" He sounded genuinely surprised. "What? No. What happened?" "She put up a picture of you, at the clinic, helping her out of the car, with a caption that makes it look like you're hers." There was silence, then a groan. "Catherine, she asked me for a ride. I didn't know she'd do this. I thought she just needed help with an appointment." "She didn't just do this," I snapped. "She staged it. She had someone take that picture. She wanted it to look intimate." "Delete it," he said quickly. "Just get rid of it." "I can delete the tag," I replied bitterly. "But it's already out there. People have seen it." I sat at the table, staring at the screen, imagining my colleagues scrolling through, family friends nodding quietly, feeding into her fantasy. It wasn't just private humiliation anymore. She had turned it into a social performance. 2 weeks later, we went to her house for another family dinner. I had tried to prepare myself, but I wasn't ready for what I saw when we walked into the living room. On the mantel, in plain view, stood a framed photograph I had never seen before. It was my mother in her 20s, smiling in a fitted dress, standing next to a man whose silhouette, dark hair, angular jawline, looked uncannily like Jasper. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Relatives gathered near the fireplace, and I heard the murmurs. "Wow," one cousin whispered, glancing between the photo and Jasper. "He looks just like Jasper, doesn't he?" My mother turned her head, smiling faintly as if she had nothing to hide. "Some things don't change," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough for everyone to hear. Heat crawled up my neck. I wanted to scream, to rip the picture from the wall and shatter it across the floor. Instead, I stood rooted to the carpet, my fists clenched. Jasper shifted beside me, his confusion plain, but he didn't understand the layers of manipulation happening right in front of us. I swallowed my fury and forced my face to stay calm, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of watching me unravel. Inside, my thoughts churned. She was collecting artifacts, planting them like evidence, trying to rewrite history with me erased. Dinner carried on with forced laughter and clinking silverware, but every sound grated against my nerves. I hardly tasted the food. Every time I glanced at that mantel, the photograph burned into me. When the evening finally ended and relatives trickled out the door, I told Jasper to wait in the car. I went back into the kitchen where Rowena was stacking plates. "You don't get to use my relationship to rewrite your past," I said, my voice low but steady. She didn't even look up. "I only want what's best for you. If he hurt me, he'll hurt you." My heart hammered, but I kept my composure. "You weren't hurt. You were rejected. That's not the same thing." Her head snapped up, eyes flashing. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," I said, "and I know you're not going to get away with this." For a moment, we stood locked in silence, her eyes daring me to break. But I didn't. I turned and walked out, feeling stronger than I had in weeks. As Jasper drove us home, the car filled with quiet tension. He glanced at me. "You're awfully quiet." I exhaled slowly, staring at the blur of lights along the freeway. She's not just telling stories. She's building a case, piece by piece, trying to erase me. But I won't let her. He reached for my hand. "I'm on your side, Catherine. Don't forget that." I nodded, though inside I knew he didn't fully understand the depth of her campaign. I whispered to myself so softly he couldn't hear. If she wants a story, I'll give her one she can't control. The vow felt heavy, but it steadied me. My silence wouldn't be passive anymore. It would be the silence of strategy, the kind that waits for the right moment to strike. She thought I'd crumble under her version of history, but the truth was, I was only getting started. That afternoon, I stopped by my mother's house to pick up a few of my childhood things. She had called earlier that week, mentioning she had boxes in the attic that might as well go home with me. I knew better than to think it was generosity. Everything with her came with a hidden angle. But I went anyway. Rowena wasn't home when I arrived. Her car was gone, and the silence of the house pressed against me like an unfamiliar weight. I stepped into the living room, the smell of her perfume faint on the curtains, mingling with the lemon polish she used religiously on the furniture. I sat down, waiting, and my eyes wandered to the bookshelf. Between albums of carefully arranged family photos, something white stuck out. A thin envelope, its corner poking beyond the leather binding. Curiosity pulled me forward. I slid it out, turning it over in my hands. My name wasn't on it. In fact, there was no name at all, just an old envelope with yellowed edges. I opened it slowly, the paper inside folded with care. The words on the page made my stomach churn. It was a letter, supposedly from decades ago, supposedly from Jasper. The date written at the top predated my relationship with him by 20 years. The sentences spoke of admiration, of longing, of affection directed at Rowena. My eyes skimmed the lines, my pulse racing as I read phrases Jasper would never say, overly formal, romanticized, entirely unlike him. I knew his handwriting, his tone. This was not him. I flipped the page over and saw the inconsistencies. A pen stroke too modern for the year, references to events out of order, words Jasper never used. My chest tightened. Disbelief gave way to confusion, then to burning anger. She had forged it. She was manufacturing evidence to legitimize her obsession, willing to bend reality itself just to prove she had once owned him. I gripped the letter tightly, my thoughts hissing inside me. She was willing to lie, to forge, to twist history, just to drag me into her fantasy. That evening, I joined the family for dinner, the letter tucked secretly in my bag. I didn't mention it, not yet. I wanted to see what she would do. We were halfway through the meal when she began. She swirled her wine, her voice calm, but cutting. "Some men," she said, smiling faintly, "have a history of wandering hearts. Once they leave one woman, they'll leave another." Her gaze lingered on me. The table went quiet. My aunt cleared her throat. My cousin shifted in his chair. Jasper blinked, confused. I steadied my voice. "That's not history, Mom. That's fantasy." The silence was thick, but I didn't elaborate. I wasn't going to waste ammunition too early. The letter in my bag felt heavy, like a weapon waiting for the right moment. She smirked, as though she believed she'd unsettled me, but I let the moment pass, my humiliation simmering into resolve. Americans like to say truth over image, and I held that thought close. I would wait for the right time, and when it came, her mask would fall. But she wasn't finished. Later in the evening, as dessert was being passed around, she leaned forward, her voice suddenly louder, meant for everyone to hear. "If he leaves you, Catherine," she said smoothly, "don't blame him. After all, he once walked away from me too." The room froze. My chest seized, fury rising like a flame threatening to consume me. I saw relatives glance at Jasper, then back at me. I saw the flicker of doubt planting itself in their minds, just as she intended. Jasper shook his head immediately, his face pale. "That's not true. Rowena, that's not true." But the damage was done. The suggestion had been made, and in families, suggestions often mattered more than facts. I sat tall, forcing myself not to tremble. Inside, humiliation cut deep, but I refused to be reduced to silence. I reminded myself of Michelle Obama's words, "When they go low, we go high." My mother wanted me to lash out, to explode, to confirm the image she painted of me as irrational. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I let her sit in her own lie, her smug smile plastered across her face, while I waited. Because lies, when exposed at the right time, destroy their creator. Driving home later, Jasper's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of the tires on the road. "She's losing her mind," he said finally. "That letter, that comment tonight, it's all lies. You know that, right?" I stared out the window, my anger coiling tighter. "It's more than lies. It's strategy. She's building a version of the past where she's the victim and I'm the fool." He glanced at me, his expression worried. "So what do we do?" I turned toward him, my voice low and steady. "If she wants to play with shadows and lies, I'll make sure the light hits her where it hurts most." The rage inside me didn't collapse into despair, it hardened into determination. My mother had crossed a line, and I would not sit by quietly while she rewrote history. The letter wasn't proof of love, it was proof of how far my mother was willing to go, and that made her dangerous. By early fall, the Houston air had cooled just enough for families to gather comfortably outdoors. Rowena's house was alive with noise that Saturday afternoon. Cheerful music playing from a speaker on the porch, children running through the backyard with popsicles in hand, uncles gathered by the grill, laughing too loudly at their own jokes. To any outsider, it looked like joy. But I knew better. My mother didn't orchestrate these grand reunions for joy. She orchestrated them for control. Inside, tables had been pushed together to seat everyone, and the smell of brisket and cornbread wafted through the house. Rowena glided around the room in a pale blue dress, her hair perfectly styled, her smile dazzling. To the relatives who adored her, she was the flawless matriarch who held everyone together. To me, she was a director setting her stage. I felt Jasper's hand rest gently on my back as we walked in. He leaned close. "It looks nice," he said, but his tone was careful. He could feel my unease, even if he didn't know exactly what storm was brewing. I looked around at the happy chatter, the glasses clinking. This isn't joy, I told myself. She's setting a stage, and I'm about to be the target again. When dinner began, Rowena maneuvered things so that Jasper ended up seated directly beside her. I saw it happening, how she subtly guided him toward the chair next to her, how relatives shifted to accommodate. I tried to catch his eye, but he was too busy helping pass dishes across the table. And then she began. "You know," she said loudly, lifting her glass slightly, "he reminded me so much of someone once, someone who made me feel alive in ways no one else did." The table quieted. Heads turned. My cousin chuckled, nudging Jasper. "Sounds familiar, huh?" Laughter rippled around the table. I felt the blood rush to my face, humiliation burning hot. My mother was crafting a love story, weaving Jasper into her past without ever saying his name. She knew what she was doing. Jasper smiled awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, but too polite to shut her down in front of everyone. He fiddled with his napkin, and I could see him wanting to shrink under the weight of the attention. Meanwhile, relatives' eyes slid toward me. Pity, that was the look. Sympathy for the poor daughter sitting across from her mother, who was implying her boyfriend was a ghost from her past. This wasn't just manipulation, it was theater, and I was cast as the fool. I dug my nails into my palm under the tablecloth, forcing myself not to cry, not to shout. She wanted a reaction. I wouldn't give her one. As the night wore on, the wine flowed and the conversations loosened. Then came the toast. Rowena stood, raising her glass high, and Jasper, ever the gentleman, rose slightly to help her steady herself. And in that moment, she wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't the casual, fleeting hug of a motherly figure. It was too long, too deliberate. Guests chuckled uncomfortably, some whispering, others exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. "Mom," I said sharply, my voice cutting through the noise. "That's enough." Rowena turned her head toward me, her smile syrupy sweet. What? Can't I appreciate a fine man? The laughter around the room grew louder, some of it nervous, some of it entertained. Jasper shifted uncomfortably, trying to step back, but Rowena held on a beat too long before finally releasing him. I clenched my fists beneath the tablecloth, every muscle in my body screaming at me to explode. She had pushed past boundaries, mocking me in front of everyone, reducing me to the daughter who couldn't even hold her place in her own relationship. Inside, my humiliation peaked, but I knew if I erupted, I'd look unstable. She would win again. So I sat still, a storm raging inside me, and forced my face into calm. Later, in the quiet after dishes were cleared and guests drifted away, Jasper leaned toward me whispering, "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to stop it without making it worse." I nodded, my throat tight. He was loyal to me, I knew that. But the damage wasn't between us. It was in the eyes of everyone who had watched, everyone who would leave tonight whispering about Rowena's performance. I remembered a line I once read. Respect yourself enough to walk away from anything that no longer serves you, grows you, or makes you happy. I wasn't ready to walk away from Jasper, but I was ready to walk away from silence. Because my silence wasn't defeat anymore. It was preparation. Every time she staged her act, she believed she was winning. But all she was doing was stacking the deck against herself for the day I chose to strike. She thought my silence meant weakness. She didn't know I was saving every word for the day she couldn't escape them. That night, after another exhausting day of teaching, I sat alone in my apartment. The stillness felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. My mother had sent me home earlier with several old boxes of things I should have, stacked neatly in the trunk of my car. She had probably hoped I would stumble onto them sooner or later. Out of habit more than curiosity, I opened one. Inside were photo albums, loose papers, and at the very bottom, a bundle of cassettes wrapped in a rubber band. I dug through them, my hands trembling without reason. Sliding one into the dusty old player she had packed along with the tapes, I pressed play. A man's voice, unfamiliar but dated, filled the room. Someone recounting stories about college, about women who admired him. And then Rowena's voice chimed in, laughing, weaving herself into the narrative. But Jasper's name was nowhere. Then, in another box, I found what finally snapped the haze. A series of notes tucked into a journal. The ink faded, but the words still legible. Each page carried a story my mother had written about being adored, pursued, left tragically. Her handwriting spilled into dramatics about a man who slipped through her fingers, yet the details were laughably inconsistent. It was clear Jasper was never part of her story. She had fabricated every thread. Relief swept over me, followed swiftly by anger. I clutched one of the pages tightly, whispering, "This is my weapon. This is how I end her charade." For the first time, I felt hope sharpen into something useful, something that could be wielded. A few days later, Jasper asked to sit down with me after dinner. His posture was tight, his eyes shadowed by something heavier than the usual end-of-day fatigue. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice low. I set my fork down carefully. "Go on." He exhaled slowly, avoiding my eyes for a moment. "Your mom cornered me. She said if I don't leave you, she'll ruin both of us." The room spun slightly. "What did she threaten you with?" "She said she'd tell the family I've been leading her on all these years," he answered, his voice bitter. She looked like she believed it herself. My breath caught, my chest tightening. My mother wasn't just spreading rumors anymore. She was blackmailing Jasper directly. "She can't do this," I said firmly, though my hands trembled. "She can, Catherine," he replied, finally meeting my eyes. "And people will believe her. She's convincing because she believes her own lies." I shook my head. "But you've done nothing wrong." "That doesn't matter," he whispered. "Perception matters, and she's good at shaping perception." The heartbreak was sharp, not just for me, but for him. He was caught in the middle of her delusion, forced to defend himself against accusations that never should have existed. "I'm not leaving you," Jasper said finally, his jaw tightening. "But I need you to understand the weight of what she's doing. She won't stop until she breaks one of us." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The words rattled inside me, more unsettling than the darkest dreams. She had declared war. The following week, as the whispers in the family grew louder, I found myself fearing not Jasper's love, but the erosion caused by constant manipulation. People could only stand so much toxicity before it drove them away, no matter how much love existed underneath. I thought of Maya Angelou's words, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." I had spent months hoping silence would protect me, that patience would preserve me, but now I knew better. I began thinking like a strategist. Truth would be my only defense. The evidence I had discovered, the tapes, the journal entries, the lies laid bare, would be the shield and the sword. I pulled out my notebook that night and started mapping everything. The comment she left online, the photo staged at the clinic, the hug too long at the family dinner, the forged letter, now the blackmail. A pattern emerged, undeniable and sharp. Despair still sat in me, but it had shifted. It no longer paralyzed me. It transformed into something sharper, steadier, tactical strength. I imagined the next family gathering, how the truth could be unveiled in such a way that there would be no room for her to twist or deny it. The storm was building, and for the first time, I didn't fear it. I welcomed it. Late that night, I sat at my desk with a pen in hand, writing furiously in my journal. I wrote not just what had happened, but what I intended to do. I traced the edges of my determination with every word. "She wants Jasper to doubt me," I scribbled. "She wants me to collapse. But silence is no longer my shield, it's my sword." The rage inside me had finally sharpened into something useful. I closed the journal, sat back, and whispered into the stillness, "The next gathering will be her undoing." She thought fear would keep me quiet, but I was ready to make her choke on her own lies. I had spent weeks moving between rage and despair, but one evening I sat at my dining table surrounded by stacks of papers, recordings, and photographs. For the first time in months, my hands didn't tremble as I sifted through them. Instead of fear, there was clarity. Every lie, every manipulation Rowena had spun was here, trapped in ink, on tape, caught in the inconsistencies she couldn't erase. I arranged them carefully, cataloging the journal pages where she wrote herself into tragedies, the forged letter that pretended to be Jasper's words, the screenshots of her comments online. Piece by piece, a different kind of story formed, not hers, but mine. When Jasper came over, I spread everything out across the table. "If she wants a war of stories," I told him, "then we'll give her the truth. But we'll do it on my terms." He leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, his face shadowed by doubt. "How far are you willing to go?" "As far as it takes," I said, my voice steady. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I remembered a line I once read. "Revenge is not about anger, it's about balance." That line no longer felt like theory, it felt like a map. I wasn't going to yell, wasn't going to collapse into tears. I was going to balance the scales. And when I did, it would be in front of the same family she had used as her stage. I decided then, the next family gathering would not be hers to control. It would be mine. That week, Jasper grew quieter. One evening, as I sat grading papers, he asked if we could talk. The heaviness in his voice made me set my pen down. "What is it?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't want to tell you, but your mom has been calling me." My stomach dropped. "Calling you? When?" "Late. Around 2 in the morning." His eyes were dark with exhaustion. "She doesn't even try to hide what she's doing." I gripped the edge of the table. "What does she say?" He swallowed hard before repeating her words. She said, "You know, Jasper, you don't really belong to her. You belong where you were meant to be." I felt sick. "And you told her?" "I told her it was inappropriate. I told her to stop. But she keeps pushing." His voice hardened. "Catherine, it isn't just manipulation anymore. She's harassing me." My chest burned, fury rising like fire. Not fury at him, but at her. She had crossed every boundary, reaching into the darkest hours of the night to poison even his sleep. "She's lost her grip on reality," I whispered. "She's turning her obsession into law, rewriting everything so we drown in her lies." Jasper took my hand across the table. I don't want to lose us. But she's relentless. You have to be prepared. This isn't going to stop until you stop her. I nodded, icy resolve forming. I understood now. Rowena had escalated into dangerous territory, cloaking her harassment under the guise of maternal concern. To anyone who hadn't seen behind her mask, it might look like worry. To me, it was war. That night, I began outlining my counterstrike. I asked Jasper to let me record the calls, with his consent, so that her words could no longer vanish into the shadows. I reached out quietly to relatives who had seen her manipulations firsthand, asking them to remember, to be willing to speak when the time came. And then I pulled out the forged letter and placed it on top of the pile. That would be the centerpiece, the moment the family would see what she had done, the proof she could not laugh away. For the first time, I felt empowered. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was building. As I looked at the pile of evidence, I whispered to myself, "Truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose, it will defend itself." The suspense didn't suffocate me anymore. It steadied me. The confrontation was coming, and I would meet it on my terms. In the days that followed, I avoided her. When she called me, I kept the conversation short, polite, refusing to give her any hint of what I was preparing. To anyone else, I looked calm, even detached. But inside, fire ran through my veins. I moved through the week with deliberate patience, teaching my students, grading assignments, making dinner with Jasper. Yet every action was underscored by a single thought. Wait for the right moment. Patience became my armor. I would not waste my strength in shouting matches or frantic defenses. I would save every ounce of it for the day she couldn't escape the truth. She thought she was writing the script. What she didn't know was that I had already prepared the final scene. Thanksgiving had always been my mother's favorite holiday, not because of the food or the family time, but because it gave her the biggest audience. That year, the house wasn't hers. It was my cousin's spacious home in Houston, but Rowena walked in as though she owned the place. She wore a cranberry-colored dress, her pearls shining under the chandelier, her smile practiced and poised. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect matriarch. To me, she looked like a predator circling before the strike. The table was set for 20. Relatives crowded around, laughing, sharing stories, and passing sweet tea. Jasper squeezed my hand under the table, steadying me. He knew what I carried in my bag, the letter, the recordings, the proof that could finally pierce her illusions. I scanned the room, heart pounding. The chatter was warm, the air filled with the smell of turkey and pumpkin pie. But beneath it was a current I could feel. Suspense rippled through me. Not fear, but anticipation. As she thought tonight would be her stage, she had no idea it was mine. Dinner was halfway through when she started. Rowena leaned back in her chair, her wineglass glinting in the candlelight, and smiled around the table. "You know," she said sweetly, "I've always been there for Jasper, even offered to help him with his career. Some men need guidance from the right woman." The laughter around the table faltered. My pulse roared in my ears. I set my fork down carefully, my voice calm but sharp. "You mean bribery, not guidance." Her eyes flashed toward me, but I was already reaching into my bag. I pulled out a printed copy of the message she had sent Jasper, an offer to fund his business if he distanced himself from me. I slid it across the table. Gasps rose, murmurs circled. My aunt whispered to my uncle. My cousin's eyes widened, and for the first time, my mother's composure cracked. She forced a smile. "You're twisting things, Catherine." "No," I said steadily. "You are." The room fell silent. I saw her falter, just for a moment, then lift her chin as though she could shrug it away. But I wasn't done. I rose slowly, every eye turning toward me. My hands didn't shake. My voice was calm, steady. "For years," I began, "my mother has written stories. Stories that painted her as a victim, as someone wronged, someone deserving of sympathy. But tonight, you're going to hear the truth." I reached into my bag again and pulled out my phone. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room. "You don't belong to her, Jasper. You belong to me." The room gasped. Forks clattered against plates. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Jasper lowered his head, shame flickering across his face. Not because of guilt, but because his private ordeal was now public. I let the recording play in full, her insidious tone impossible to misinterpret. When it ended, silence weighed heavy across the table. Before she could speak, I pulled out the forged letter. "And this," I said, holding it up, "was supposed to prove her fantasy. But the handwriting doesn't match, the dates don't align, and Jasper never wrote it." I laid it on the table, next to the printed message, evidence stacking like bricks on her crumbling wall. Finally, I held up a statement from an old acquaintance, one who had known her decades ago, who confirmed that the so-called love story had been nothing but a one-sided obsession. "She's been building this illusion for years," I said firmly. "And she's used it to humiliate me, to discredit me, to poison this family. But tonight, it ends." The room shifted. Whispers spread, faces hardened. My cousin shook his head in disgust. My aunt muttered, "How could you?" My uncle crossed his arms, glaring at her. Rowena's face reddened, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for air. "This is all lies. She's twisting." But no one believed her now. I looked around the table, my heart pounding but steady. For years, she wrote the story. Tonight, I read the truth out loud. Rowena tried again, her voice breaking. "You're my daughter. How could you do this to me?" "You did this to yourself," I replied coldly. The room erupted with disapproval. Not at me, but at her. Disappointment, anger, betrayal. The perfect host, the flawless matriarch, was crumbling under the weight of her own lies. Jasper reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. His support was solid, unshaken. For the first time in months, I felt liberated. Exhaustion swept through me, but with it came a surge of righteous satisfaction. She had been forced into silence, not by my rage, but by her own exposed deceit. She wanted me erased. Instead, she erased herself. The morning after Thanksgiving, my apartment was quieter than usual. The phone buzzed repeatedly, vibrating across the kitchen counter as cousins, aunts, and even distant relatives reached out with their own reactions to the night before. Some called in hushed voices to say they were proud of me. Others left short, clipped messages. "You went too far," or "Maybe you should have handled it differently." But not one of them denied what they had heard. I sat with a cup of coffee, staring at the steam rising as though it might carry my thoughts away. The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered. For the first time, Rowena had been silenced publicly. Yet I knew her well enough to understand she would not stay quiet for long. She had never accepted defeat without reaching for another mask to wear. I whispered to myself, remembering a line I had once read, "The price of truth is often loneliness, but never regret." Loneliness I could handle. Regret was something I refused to live with. I braced myself, knowing another battle was on its way. The following Sunday, at church, the congregation filled the pews. The air smelled of old hymnals and polished wood. Rowena sat near the front, dressed in a pale suit, a scarf tied delicately at her throat. I felt Jasper's hand slip into mine as the choir began to sing. Halfway through the sermon, I noticed her shifting. Then, with a dramatic sway, she collapsed forward, her body slumping onto the pew. Gasps erupted. A woman behind us cried out, "Oh, dear Lord!" People rushed to her side. Jasper instinctively jumped up to help, guiding her gently back as others fanned her face. "Poor Rowena," a relative muttered behind me. "She's been under so much stress." I stood frozen, my jaw clenched. Stress? No, this was theater. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking up at the crowd gathered over her. Her voice was weak, trembling. I just feel so faint." "It's all been too much." The congregation whispered with sympathy. Some patted her hand, others whispered prayers. I could almost see the pity knitting itself back together, undoing the truth I had revealed just days earlier. I bit the inside of my cheek, disgust swirling in me. She was performing weakness now, wielding fragility as another weapon, but I refused to react. If I lashed out here, in front of neighbors and church elders, I would look cruel. So I sat back down, my silence intact, watching as she soaked in the sympathy. By the next week, Jasper brought home an envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting. He set it on the table, his expression wary. "It's for you," he said. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter written in her flowing script. "My dearest Catherine," it began. "I'm sorry for all the hurt between us. I only ever wanted to protect you. If only you understood my pain, maybe we wouldn't be here." Line after line followed the same pattern. Apology laced with accusation, remorse mixed with blame. She wrote of sleepless nights, of being misunderstood, of how I had twisted things. It ended with a flourish. "I hope one day you'll forgive me for loving too much." I let the paper fall onto the table. "This isn't an apology," I said flatly. "It's poison wrapped in perfume." Jasper picked it up, scanning quickly. "Maybe she's trying to make peace." I shook my head. "No, peace doesn't come dressed in self-pity. Peace admits wrong. This," I tapped the letter with my finger, "is another manipulation." The heat in my chest rose, not just anger, but clarity. She wasn't trying to heal. She was trying to reset the narrative again, to paint herself as the suffering mother whose only crime was love. A quote floated into my mind, sharp and true. "Apologies without change are just manipulation." That night, after Jasper had gone to bed, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. The lamplight cast long shadows across the room. I wrote slowly, each word steady, unshaken. "I don't need her apology," I wrote. "I need my peace." I realized then that I no longer sought her approval. I didn't crave her validation or her acknowledgement. My strength had grown in the silence between battles, in the evidence I had gathered, in the truth I had spoken aloud. I looked out the window at the city lights flickering across Houston, and I whispered a vow to myself. I will continue forward. I will no longer be chained to her approval. In my mind, I could already see it, the final crack in her facade, the moment the family's sympathy would no longer hold. Her downfall was coming, not because I would destroy her, but because she had already destroyed herself. She thought an apology would buy her redemption, but all it bought was my resolve to never look back. Christmas Eve always carried an uneasy weight for me, but that year it felt suffocating. The house was lit in golden tones, candles flickering in every corner, the table draped with red and green. My relatives filled the rooms, their voices rising in holiday cheer. But beneath it all, tension pressed down like a storm cloud waiting to break. Rowena sat at the head of the table, dressed in emerald silk, her pearls catching the light. She tapped her glass gently, calling for silence, and then rose to her feet. "All I ever wanted," she declared, her voice thick with emotion, "was what's best for my daughter." There were nods, murmurs of agreement. One cousin whispered, "That's noble of her." I stared at her, my lips pressed tight. Noble? No, hollow. Every word is theater. She looked around the table as if soaking in the sympathy she had demanded, her eyes glistening with feigned humility. But I was ready this time. I wasn't going to let her close the year with another act of false redemption. I took a slow breath. She thought she was still directing the play. She didn't know the script had changed. Before I could move, another voice cut through the room, a man's voice, low but steady. "I remember those days," he said. Heads turned as Silas, an old acquaintance of Rowena's, stepped into the dining room. I had invited him, though no one knew until now. He walked with measured steps, his presence commanding the room without effort. "Rowena wasn't left behind," he continued calmly. "She was never chosen in the first place." Gasps filled the air, forks clattered against plates. My relatives stared at him, then at her. Rowena's face drained of color. "You're lying," she snapped, her composure fracturing. Silas shook his head. "You used to tell everyone men adored you, but the truth is, we all walked away." "You spun stories, Rowena, but none of them were real." The silence that followed was heavy, punctured only by the sound of her shallow breathing. Her mask was slipping, crumbling under the weight of a truth that wasn't just mine anymore. I could feel the shift in the room. Relatives leaned away from her, their eyes narrowing. For once, she wasn't in control. I stood slowly, my hands steady as I pulled the folder from my bag. You built lies to erase me, I said, my voice firm, cutting through the thick air. But every lie has an end. I laid the evidence on the table, her forged letters, the recordings of her late-night calls, the testimonies from those she had manipulated. Silas's words hung behind me, reinforcing every page, every truth I placed before them. This isn't about protection, I continued. It was about possession, about rewriting the past and dragging me into it. But I won't let you do that anymore. Rowena's lips trembled. You're twisting this. No, I said, locking eyes with her. That's what you've done your whole life. The difference is, now everyone sees it. I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not relief, not triumph, but clarity. The truth may hurt for a little while, I added, quoting words that had steadied me through countless nights, but a lie hurts forever. She stared at me, anger and desperation warring in her expression, but she had no defense left, only silence. I leaned closer, my words meant only for her. You don't control me anymore. The room stayed quiet. Relatives shifted in their seats, whispering, some shaking their heads. Jasper reached for my hand beneath the table, his grip steady, his presence grounding me. Rowena sat back down slowly, her shoulders slumped, the performance gone. Later, Jasper and I left together, stepping into the cool December night. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, but for the first time in years, it also smelled like freedom. In the car ride home, I closed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones, but also something stronger, peace. That night, I wrote in my journal one last time. I don't need her apology. I don't need her story. I walked through fire, but I came out carrying the light. I looked out the window at the city glowing with Christmas lights, and I knew the chains had fallen away. My life was mine again. She wanted to rewrite my life. Instead, I wrote the ending she never saw coming.